o'clock. So let's stand for the pledge real quick, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Today is Monday, June 22nd, 2020, the time being 6 p.m. This is a special meeting of the Greensburg City Council. It's called to order at this time. This time, please silence all of your electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants complete a voluntary survey. Brenda, if you please call the roll.
Jamie Kane,
Here.
Vieta McKenzie,
Here.
Kevin Fleetwood,
Here.
Rick Emsweller,
Here.
and Daryl Foley.
Okay. Tonight's topic in its entirety is to get an update from our financial firm, Reedy Financial. We have Eric Reedy with us and his assistant Dave, or I'm sorry Dave, your official title has escaped me.
Just the accountant works for me.
Accountant, okay. So they're just going to give us an update. They've handed you some information. So gentlemen, if you would like, you can either do it from there or the table, whichever you prefer.
Good evening, everyone. As Josh said, my name is Eric Reedy. We have offices in Seymour, which I came from, and then Indianapolis. We're a firm of about 25 people. The firm started in about 2009, and our primary role is to provide financial planning, budgeting, financing, among other things, to Indiana local units of government. So Gabe handed out about a 6-page document, and maybe it's 5 pages, 6 with the cover page. And Josh wanted us to kind of give you an overview of some things we've been working on and just some discussion items. And if you would like to interact during this, please do so. The first page, obviously, COVID-19 has been something of great importance this year. What Congress did is they passed the CARES Act a few months ago, and one of the things I'd like to share with you on the CARES Act is the different components to it. The first thing that the CARES Act did is it provided direct payments. So if you look at this graph, the average compensation in Decatur County is a tick over $44,000. The CARES Act provided $3,400 if you're a family of 4, husband and wife, and then 2 kids, and that would just be on top of regular compensation. Now it phased out at a certain level. You know, if you're making much more than $100,000, it phased out fully. But anyway, $3,400 is what folks got as a result of the CARES Act. The gray box on the box to the right is unemployment. So what the CARES Act did is you have your normal unemployment that the state provides, which in Indiana, the full unemployment is about a little under $400 a week. What the CARES Act did is it gave you an extra $600 a week, and that's for 4 months is what that is. So when you add all that together, it's about $17,820. So what we wanted to show folks is, you know, that the base employment or the base compensation, $44,489, if somebody is unemployed for 4 months, they would receive $29,659 plus the $3,400 and the $17,820. So they actually make, you know, a little bit more than normal compensation during that time period. So the CARES Act should help offset the impact that COVID-19 had, particularly on local units of government in the state of Indiana, is the point of this graph. So what are the major revenues for the city of Greensburg? And tonight, we're just talking the city-related funds, which would be the general fund, the engaged fund, local road and street, those type of funds. We're not talking about utilities tonight. I mean, we can get into utilities if you like, but this purpose of this is not utilities and it's not TIF. It's simply the city-related funds. Property tax, due to the CARES Act, and I got an update from Josh on this, we anticipate a reduced amount of delinquencies in 2020. Our projections reflect a 90% collection rate. So Josh just told me, what was it, 8.9%? So you're actually doing better than just a standard projection that we're using, but we did want to be sensitive to, the governor released one of his executive orders was, you know, that there's a delay in the first property tax payment date, and then, you know, there's the normal due date in November still, but, you know, due to COVID-19 and all the uncertainties, that was the reason for the executive order, and we wanted to show a 90% collection rate in 2020. Again, it looks like you're much better off. Taxes aren't due for the first time until July 15th, so you still have time to work on that 8.9%. Folks that had escrows had to pay by the normal payment date because that they have all of their money or property taxes paid by escrow. Everybody else had until July 15th, so you still have time to work on that one. Income tax is kind of a wait and see, but we anticipate the CARES Act will significantly reduce the impact on income taxes. So again, the gray box is unemployment, and unemployment is taxable. So, you know, if somebody did go on the enhanced unemployment, we don't anticipate, you know, unless there's still a great amount of unemployment, you know, into August and September, we don't anticipate a big decrease in income taxes. And the thing about income taxes in Indiana is income taxes at the local level aren't distributed for 2 years after they're collected. So the 2020 taxes would be on the returns that are filed in April of next year, and then they get audited. And the audit comes out in the summer, and then the state budget agency makes a projection of those income taxes to be distributed the following year. So 2020 income taxes on the local level won't be distributed until 22. So your 21 distributions that you're getting ready to, you know, we should get a certification, supposed to get it, I think it's August 1, is that right, Gabe?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Does the state ever hit that? No. You know, we'll get it sometime, but that's what the state statute states. But I don't think there'll be too much exposure to that. You know, you guys tell us what's this local community looking at it in terms of unemployment. Obviously, Honda's going to be the big employer. Are they back to work? Those would be the things to obviously look at. Now, on the gas tax side, there is going to be a decrease there. So the one thing that we know is there's a 3-month lag between the receipt of the tax and the distribution of the tax. So whereas income tax, there's pretty much a 2-year delay, gas tax, there's a 3-month delay. And what we know at this time, due to COVID, the city is expected to receive about a 16% reduction this year. The other thing that we know is next year, the state has already said to expect the community crossing grants to be somewhat less. I mean, we're hearing 50%, but that's subject to some fine tuning. You know, the city of Greensburg typically doesn't do the full $1 million deals. So if you shoot for $500,000, that theoretically should be available. But anyway, the number that we're looking at is that 16% reduction, and in the reports we're getting ready to go over, that'll be reflected in these reports. The next page, again, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those along the way or at the end. So long-term operating capital improvement plan, we're kind of in a first draft of that. What we want to do is have a council workshop sometime before the budget is published, which would be around mid-August this year. So I'm sure the mayor will and Brenda will be working on a time for us to do that. And at that time, we'll be going over a long-term operating and capital improvement plan. Now, this is the first draft. These graphs here are the first draft of the capital side. I don't have the details for you in this report, but I can tell you it's an $18.5 million funded 2021 through 26 or 6-year plan. We've got that amount of money funded within the capital improvement plan. And what that represents is just shy of $3 million for public safety, $6.5 million for streets, and then $9 million on buildings and other. One of the big things we'll talk about here in a little bit is this building. So part of that $9 million is this building. Cash reserves, one of the things I tell my clients is cash reserves is a very important item to keep track of. I belong to an organization called the Government Finance Officers Association. It's out of Chicago, and lots of cities and towns and counties around the United States belong to it. And what they do is they come up with these policies that kind of best practices that they would like to see cities and towns and counties use. One of them is cash reserves. So, you know, how much cash do you have? How much cash do you need? They recommend 180 days on your operational funds, and that's because property taxes are received twice a year, you know, at the end of June and into December normally. And, you know, from the point January 1 hits until the end of June hits, I mean, you're spending cash. So they recommend 180 days. Now, the good news is the major operating funds, which would include the general fund, the MVH fund, local option income tax, public safety, those funds are over 180 days. So you guys are in good shape there. One thing I would mention on the capital funds, and by the way, the proprietary funds are your pension funds. That's just a fancy name that the accounting folks give the pension funds. Capital funds would be your team cap development, and the mayor tells me that I think $670,000 or so has been set aside for the HVAC of this building. That's the reason why the days in cash and capital funds go down. That fund, you know, there isn't as much cash in there as there is the operating funds. So when you spend that amount, it just reduces cash there, but that would be planned spending. Planned spending's fine. You don't want to have something just pop up on you and you're like, where'd that cash go, right? And then other funds, some example of other funds would be like Honda. The Honda fund that you all have would be another fund. So overall days, 458, 19, 20 goes down to 418, which is really good. Now that would include the 90% collections for the general, or for property tax. So, you know, if that number's better, then these numbers get better. But overall, Greensburg is in really good shape. So page 3, at the top of page 3 is projecting cash surplus deficit, which is just revenues over expenditures in all of your funds. So again, major operating funds for you, that means the general fund, the MVH fund, and lit public safety. In 2019, the major operating funds, 1.1 million or so. In 20, it goes down, but that's really COVID related, and then starting to spend on the capital plan, which we'll roll out to you in the council workshops. But again, these numbers, you know, tie back to the last page, which is the cash reserves page. Cash reserves are still really good, so they all work hand in glove. So, you know, if you're going to spend X on, you know, a capital item or on an operating item, you know, that's going to have an impact on revenues, which is going to have an impact on cash reserves. So all that works, you know, hand in glove, like I said. 2021, you can see that there's some deficit there. That's all the HVAC that's been set aside, the $670,000. which is fine. Again, that's a plan number. And then 2022 and 23 things pick back up. Don't have the COVID-related revenue reductions, and in the out years, the capital plan is more front-loaded, which is typical. But again, we'll go over that later. Cash reserves policy. So again, there's a bunch of policies you can look at. And what I tell my clients is, I don't know if you all have heard of like Standard & Poor's, the ratings that are done on local units of governments. The better your bond rating, the lower interest rates you'll pay on your bonds. And I was telling the mayor, the more boxes you can check like these policies, the more favorably that the Standard & Poor's will look upon cities like you. Cash reserves is king in the bond rating world. So I was telling the mayor that, you know, if it's a property tax bond, any bond, they'll be looking at cash reserves, and then they'll look at the tax base, or if it's utility bond, the revenue base. And those two things are king. And then other policies such as investment policies, and you could have a debt policy. I mean, there's all kinds of policies. Will just help tick off boxes and give you all a better bond rating. Unused appropriations, that's just a good way to manage the budget. And, you know, if you set a goal of, for example, we've got on here on page 3, historically the general fund has had 5% unused appropriations. So an appropriation by law lapses at the end of the year and becomes unexpended, and it just becomes part of your cash balance in that fund. So that's the default. The other thing would be an encumbrance. So if you have that legally binding contract, then that appropriation would carry forward into the next year. But you have to have a contract. You just can't encumber to encumber. There has to be a legally binding document there that encumbers that money. But anyway, unused appropriations, I tell folks that you know, that's one of the top 5 errors in your financial quiver. I was telling the mayor, if you can raise that 5% to 6% in the general fund alone, that's $70,000, which just means you know, you're building up some cash reserve. So, you know, what level of cash do you want? What level of spending you want? Those are the things that we'll talk about over time. Bottom line is Greensburg has a great financial position and lots of good things to work with. And that's really one of the things that's indicative at the bottom of page 3 is how do you compare to other similar cities. So this is the 20 cities that are closest in comparison to you. And again, I'll show you who they are when we do the workshop. But you know, on property tax, you're about the 14th, and that would mean the 14th lowest. So number 1 would be the highest, and then at the closer you get to 20, would be lower. So you're number 14 on property tax levy, which means you're lower than average. On budget, you're 13, so you're 3 lower than average. On net assessed value, you're number 11, which means you're right on average. And then tax rate, you're number 13, which means you're 3, you know, on the low side of average. So on all these matrices of comparisons, Greensburg looks favorable. Page 4, tax rates. So we're showing you where you stack up on income tax rates and property tax rates. So in 2020, you have in Decatur County 5 different income tax rates. You have certified shares at 1.27%. That goes into your general fund. You have public safety of 0.25. That goes into your lit public safety fund. And again, we'll show you all this at the workshop. We'll go through all this specifically. Economic development goes into your economic development income tax fund. Property tax relief, that reduces property tax bills. So everybody in Decatur County gets this fraction of 1%, 0.08%. That's a reduction, and where that comes into play is we haven't got into the circuit breaker. I don't know what your level of understanding is, but in 2009 the circuit breaker first went into law, and it's a reduction in property taxes. So, if a property taxpayer is paying $1,000 on property taxes and the law says you can only collect $900, that creates a $100 credit. And how that credit gets funded is by tax rate. If you being the city is 25% of it, then of that $100, you have to fund $25 of that credit, and that's just a reduction in your property tax collection. And then the citizen or the taxpayer doesn't pay that. That's how the circuit breaker law works. And what it is it's 1% on homestead property, so your primary residence, and then 2% on non-homestead and agricultural and long-term care got thrown in there, and then 3% on everything else, so commercial, industrial, personal property is 3%. We'll get into all that stuff later. 2020 property tax rates. These are the taxing district rates. So this would include the county rate, the township rate, the library rate, certainly the city rate. I wasn't keeping track of what all I said, but it includes all the tax rates. The school rate, I don't think I mentioned. So Washington Township is at $259.42. Adams is at $243.85. Clay Township is at $244.48. So those are just the facts. And looking at that, I can then kind of picture in my head, where you're at on the circuit breaker projections, and you're at a tax rate right now where the circuit breaker really isn't that big of a hindrance to the city of Greensburg, which is both good for you as the elected officials of Greensburg, and it's good for the taxpayers. So we have some clients that have 30% plus circuit breakers, and that means, if they have a $10 million levy, they don't get $3 million of it. When the circuit breaker law came out, Muncie immediately announced that they were laying off 30 firemen and 30 cops. And that was back in 2008 when it passed. They knew that, that they just couldn't afford that anymore. You guys aren't in that situation, so. Greensburg historical projected property tax rates. You can see what your historical rates look like. Here's another policy, tax rate, debt policy. Those are things that we can work on in the long-term financial planning. Capital bond. So these are things that we can talk about in the future, but in essence, you have two bonds that are paying off, and these are your two property tax bonds, meaning there's a property tax rate associated with them. It's part of this 259, this 243, and this 244 up above. Anyway, both of those bonds pay off in the 2022 budget year, and what a lot of folks would do is look at that and be like, well, that's an opportunity to do something new, and you have level debt service. So that would be a policy that you all would consider, and it's something to plan on, and we can talk about that certainly in the future. City Hall, I understand there's some talk about City Hall. What we like to do is pretty much start with the end of a project, which means when do you want to start construction or renovation in this case. And then from there, we need to know, when do bids need to be let? Well, you can't let bids until you have money in the bank. You can't have money in the bank until you go through the bond process and get money. So that's where we come in, and we'll work with the city on obtaining the money that you need, and we'll chat about that. One of the things I like to do when we get to projects like that is just simply put a timeline together so everybody's on the same page. So that's what we'll be looking like. The 2021 budget timeline is Gabe handed that out to you. Pretty much, this is a draft, but it would adhere to what you did last year. And really the two most important dates are, the public hearing date and the adoption date. And, to be consistent with last year's process, the very first line on page 2 is the public hearing date, September 8th, and then the adoption date would be October 5th. So those are things for you all to consider, and we're just making it consistent with last year, as we said. And then earlier in the presentation, talked about when will the budget be posted in Gateway, which is now how budgets are, instead of them being in the newspaper, they get posted into the state's Gateway system. That has to be by Tuesday, August 25th, is when that has to be done. So the council workshop that I've talked about a couple times, we recommend that be sometime prior to the Gateway submission, which again is August 25th, so that's up to you all to decide when you would like to do that. 2021 budget book, all the department heads, I believe, have submitted their budgets to the mayor, which is the statutory process. He's now in the process of looking those over and things of that nature. So we'll go over line items when we have the council budget workshop, share that information with you again before it gets advertised. And then what we wanted to show you in this graph at the middle of page 5 is just simply 2021 revenues. These are the budgets that have been proposed by your department heads. And we've got an unused appropriation amount that is historical. So then you can see the surpluses and deficits and what that would do to the cash position. Greensburg's in really good shape. The mayor may tweak some of this. The Indiana statute, the mayor proposes to you, and then you can either agree with that or reduce it. And that's the statutory process. So this is just a summary of what each fund looks like in that budget column, just as a total, and what it might do to the surplus deficit and then the cash balances. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So as Eric mentioned there on the last sheet, this is sort of, if you will, the fully loaded budget. Everybody submitted their stuff. We sent it over to Reedy to sort of put together in this binder. And then we'll go through and sort of, for lack of better terms, this is worst case. And we'll sort of go through and tweak. And I think there's some things that kind of got duplicated on some different pieces, so we're working on that as well. And then questions for Eric or comments? I thought it would be good for us all to sort of sit down with these folks, since you all haven't met them before, and sort of see where they're at and what they've been working on over the last few months, and then to sort of, for lack of better terms, reassure us that we are okay and that we will be fine. And they've done a really good job of considering the COVID piece, and all of this is built with the 10% reduction in collection, which we were having the conversation earlier, is so unlikely. We will eventually get 100%, and just how long is it going to take us?
So just,
Go ahead, Jamie.
no, I was just asking the question to make sure I'm on the right page too. I know we'll have a budget workshop to kind of go over the budget in Form 1, make sure we're good with that. But you're talking about a separate meeting just to talk about the capital improvement plan?
Well, it would be, Jamie, we're working on an operating and capital improvement plan. And what that plan does, Jamie, is it shows 3 years worth of historical data for each fund, the current budget year, and then it projects out 3 to 5 years. And it will show you year by year what each fund is doing in terms of, is it surplusing or the deficits, what's it doing to cash. It'll help you make decisions on this year's, because this year's budget not only, if you have, a fund that, has an increase greater than inflation, that would have an impact on not only this year, but potentially next year. So those are the things that we try and get in front of you, and those are things that the mayor is considering currently. So it's both operating and capital.
So we want to do that before we had our budget session.
No, because they run concurrent. We just approve the 2021 column, but we can look at what the 2020.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to have that information when we do our budget
Yeah.
session.
Kate, did you give a copy to all the department heads behind you?
not that we have to decide now.
No.
At our next council meeting in July, we probably ought to set a date. Do we want to do a date in July, or do we want to wait until August?
Does everybody keep that third Monday that our second special meetings typically fall on? Is that okay? The third Monday in July?
A while back, when the council were just, we said, hey, if we had to add a second meeting, we'd usually take like the third Monday of the month and say that's what special meeting done.
Any other
Are you
questions?
talking for workshop?
Yeah. And they'll bring the financial plan, the capital improvement plan, the management report, and the budget book. July 20th. And those usually take, what, 2.5 hours? Want to do 6 o'clock? Does that work for everybody? Okay.
The third Monday of July.
Any other questions for Eric? Eric, anything else for us?
Does it have to be turned in
The-
August 25th.
I remember
So we have
last
time,
year.
we have time to have a meeting in July, we could have another meeting in August, and so we'd have plenty of time.
Because last year there was a discussion about that, if I recall correctly, about wanting more time before
Yes.
having to turn it in.
Yes.
It was all,
It was like, right, it was like on Monday and it had to be
Yeah.
on Wednesday or something. Is that it? Okay,
Covered, covered.
okay for that. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Council members, there's an airport board meeting at 7 across the hall. If you want to stay and get an update on where the airport's at, that's up to you.